for him logically, even to think that way, that it's definitely going to work. As you mentioned, it works for a time, but to keep it up long enough to definitely be grandfathered in, very unlikely. Just to say that there are people in the space who push to try to, they push for the for primacy, right? It's a biological imperative, right? People fight for, they fight for status. They fight for the ability to win, right? They fight to be first. And so sometimes you'll get this kind of like mudslinging that's a knee-jerk reaction, like, oh, okay, we've got something to lose right now. Sure, it's flawed in terms of the foundations of the logic, right? The zero-sum thinking. But when people are pressed, when they feel cornered, it's fight or flight. And I think especially during prolonged bear markets, you see a lot more of that behavior. Everybody starts to think, you mentioned before, when money enters the picture,
right,
people start to act weird. When they see, oh my gosh, like their mind is opened up to the possibility of like, oh, I can start a new blockchain system, or I can start a referral system, or I can start a staking system or I can start a stake matching system that puts me puts me in control of billions of dollars of assets by literally submitting a smart contract, creating nothing but a smart contract. Yeah, they go nuts. But on the flip side, when they see that there's like the FOMO, right? The thought that now there's something of substance in the world, we've been working with it, it's translated into US dollars, which they understand in a much more real way, in a much more personal way. And they see the very risk of missing out, the very real risk of missing out. That's when the daggers come out. And I think that's what in my armchair, my armchair analysis is that I think that's what you've been facing. I've got to ask, do you have that quote framed? Do you own a t-shirt yet?
Do I know who I am? No, I don't. I mean, at the end of the day, you just move on and you keep pushing through. And you also asked, what do I do to cope? I've recently started doing Tai Chi. I use isolation tanks, meditate, breathing exercises, all kinds of things you can do to kind of calm down and reduce the stress. And I'm Italian by descent, so we're always high strung. So you always have to work with that. And life moves on. I've gotten a heck of a lot more chill and resilient and thicker skinned over the years, and a lot easier for me to navigate things. And I'm under more criticism today than I've ever been in my entire life, but I don't feel it as much today as I felt it before. Where I still feel it is in the case in two different cases. One are things like when Max Kaiser comes out and does that, because I've known Max for 8 years. I broke Ethereum on a show. I broke Cardano on a show. We've always had a cordial and nice relationship. I've had dinner with him multiple times. And then suddenly out of the blue, he's just like, you're a criminal and you're a pedophile, and Bitcoin is king and everything else is garbage. And he just goes out of his way to attack me out of the blue. And I'm just like, okay, I guess the friendship's over. I guess the 8 years that we've known each other and the things we've done are in all the collaboration there. You even asked me for money to sponsor your show. I'm a criminal and a pedophile, but you want my money? It's like, okay, well, you're taking Putin's money. So, that's one thing that bothers the hell out of me, because it's just like senselessness. For the moment, he makes money and fame for burning me, but that goes away in 6 months, and the relationship is permanently damaged. Why would any reasonable human being think this is a good way of doing business? Could you end up in your 60s with no friends, no one who respects you, and you're completely destroyed? It's like, okay. And it just makes me sad. It's so self-destructive, and it's so pointless in the grand scheme of things. There's no wisdom in it. And where it also bothers me, when people like Adam, for example, who have no reason to do what he's doing, no reason to attack, for just succumb to the maximalist insanity of the movement and think it's a good business decision to say things. I can guarantee you that Joe Lubin probably at least once or twice in his career has wanted to tweet something about me. Joe had the restraint to not do it because he recognizes that I'm a CEO of a company, he's a CEO of a company, and one of these days, maybe our companies are going to work together. And if you start doing things and saying things in that domain, it makes it exceedingly difficult. I've had to learn this lesson. Like, I criticized the Tezos community years ago because I thought it was horrible what they did with Johan and all this other stuff. And I wrote a blog post about it. And to this day, the Tezos community just kicks me in the teeth every opportunity they get. And there's just no reconciliation or chance to work there. It's just not going to happen. It's the same with the EOS community. Now, these are self-inflicted. I could have and probably should have stayed silent in certain cases and just let bygones be bygones, and maybe, just maybe, we could have collaborated on something and worked together, and the world would have been a much better place. So I had to learn that lesson early in my career. And I see a guy who's in his 50s who invented proof of work and who's the CEO of a very prominent company in Silicon Valley in our industry succumb to that same mistake that I succumbed to in my early part of my career and get drawn to that crowd. And that's the other part that bothers me deeply, is that, because it's just a loss for us all. Because we can't work together, because we can't collaborate, it now means that the things we could have created together don't exist. And I'm not naive enough to believe that our company is going to invent everything. The reality is we have to work with people outside of our company to get things done and collaborate to get things done. And if this is the way that we're treated, then it hurts everybody in the industry and slows us all down.
Sure. You mentioned a couple of missteps that you've taken along the way, and some things that maybe it sounds like you regret doing very similar things, and you characterize it as being a younger person, younger professionally, just by way of age too, just younger, less developed person, maybe professionally. What is the road to redemption? How do we rebuild bridges? If you're talking about everyone firebombing them,
there's no redemption.
Along those same lines, I have a question, which is, what advice would you give for younger people who are in a position, haven't seen a lot of limelight yet, but maybe want to anticipate that because they're building something that they think is great? What advice would you give for people who may be entering a similar position to what you've been in for the last 8 years?
That's a great question too. So how I was raised is say you're sorry, admit mistakes, and try to build common ground. We don't live in a society anymore, unfortunately, that does that. I mean, we're tearing down statues of Grant. We're and calling him a racist, even though he was the guy that won the Civil War. We live in a society now that there is no forgiveness, and everybody has to be pure. And if they're not pure, then there's a group of people who will wake up every day and destroy that human being and never forgive them. And unfortunately, apologies mean nothing anymore. You can never be forgiven. If the minute that you commit a sin, some group of people will decide that is who you are for the rest of time and hate you forever and attack you forever. So the advice I give to young people is just don't care. Just don't care. Disengage. If that group of people decides to write you off, write them off, and then try to work with people who are more reasonable. But unfortunately, there's no way to recover from a misstep anymore. There are people. I saw this in my own experience with the MetaMask incident. I've explained it multiple times. I said I'm sorry to the MetaMask guys. If I got a do-over, of course I'd do things differently. Is there any forgiveness there? No. Is there any understanding there? No. Will there ever be reconciliation? Probably not. It is what it is. You just accept it. You just move on. And so what you do is you stick to the philosophy, you stick to your principles, you stick to your goals, and you just keep moving through and pushing through. Because at the end of the day, the people who tear you down, the critics, the cynics, they don't have a lot of resources and motivation. And while their criticism may be harsh and vicious, it's short term. And you just have to survive it and push through. And you focus on the things that you're trying to win. A person who's doing this really well, actually, is Elon Musk. He gets brutally criticized. He says batshit crazy things on Twitter from time to time. And in the short term, all these people, he should be fired. He should be removed as CEO of Tesla. And how's their market cap doing? How's Tesla doing as a company? So the key is success. And the key is just focusing on the vision and the things that you want to accomplish. And you have to set your goalposts and ignore any person who says otherwise and just go chase those goalposts. And you know what? There's going to be somebody who admires that, respects that, and pushes for that and goes for it. I truly wish we live in a society that, we claim to be a Christian society. We're not. That says forgiveness, it's a tenet of that faith. We don't live in that society anymore. I really wish we could get back to that. We can let people recover and be restored and redeemed. We're not there. I blame social media for it. I blame this shallow culture that we've developed for it. Maybe we can find a way out of it. Maybe we can't. But it's just a bad situation. It does get me a little concerned because, we have academic relationships and partnerships, and I feel censored. There are things that I've seen all the time that I'm disgusted with, and I think are profoundly immoral or a profound double standard or counterproductive or damaging to society. And there's certain topics I can't comment on or say things about because I'm afraid that if I do, some students group is going to wake up and say, oh God, this guy's this label. And then the university says, well, the path of least resistance is basically detachment. and shut down the lab or something like that. And, you know, I have so many CEO friends who feel the exact same way. They recently ran a poll in the United States. 64% of Americans feel that they have political views or opinions that they feel uncomfortable sharing with other people for fear of retaliation or reprisal. So we live in a silence and shame culture as well. And so, you know, on one hand, you'd like to tell kids you have freedom of speech and freedom of opinion, and occasionally you're going to do or say things that are mistakes or offend people. And that's okay because it's a free society. On the other hand, we see this cultural Marxism that's working its way through, that if you're not part of the pure class, then you'll be purged and then silenced and forever labeled and tarred and feathered and so forth. So it's a dangerous time. It's a really dangerous time. And going back to what you were saying about anonymity, I think privacy and anonymity is an absolute concern now, because frankly, it's going to increasingly become the only way we can freely express ourselves. The whole reason these things like 4chan exist is because there are no other outlets. You're no longer allowed to believe that a certain medicine treats coronavirus. If you, for example, are a hydroxychloroquine fan, you could be demonetized and delisted from YouTube and Twitter. You could be a doctor who's treated patients with this, and you're sharing anecdotal evidence that you think it does something, and you could be demonetized and delisted or told that you're a quack and your medical license is in peril for that one thing. Apply that to everything in society. If you're not going along with whatever the mainstream is, then you can be deplatformed and shamed. So my advice to entrepreneurs is know your mission and your goals. Know when you have to stay silent, even if it's inconvenient or it hurts you, because this is the world we live in. Accept the fact that you will never be pure. And when you come out the other side, you're going to have a group of people who hate you for the rest of your life. And there's nothing you can do about that. Well, George Bush, great example of that. I've met Bush a few times, and he lives down in Texas. He's painting his pictures. He's just living his life. For the rest of his life, half of America hates the man, calls him a war criminal, a murderer. They think he's the worst human being alive, part of the New World Order, all these things. And there's certain places he can't go because his personal safety is at risk. And nothing he says or does, no redemption he could see, could ever undo that. And it's going to be the exact same for Trump when he leaves the White House, either in 2021 or 2025. For the rest of his life, he'll be one of the most hated men in America for the things he said and done. This is a society that we live in. If you want to change anything, if you want to build anything, if you want to make things great, you have to accept that you're going to develop people who hate you for the rest of your life, and you can never say you're sorry or recover from it. There's no redemption for it. You just accept it and you move on. Now, if you're willing to do that and you have the courage to embrace that, there's a liberation about it, not caring what other people think. There's a liberation about knowing that you can change the world and actually impact things and make things very different. And if you're doing it for higher principles like your kids or your faith or a philosophy or something like that, then you can take yourself out of the equation and say, it's okay, I can endure this. It's almost like those coal miners who had to dig a ventilation tunnel for Chernobyl. And they all went to that shaft and knowing full well that they're probably going to die of some horrible radiation poisoning or cancer or something like that by doing the job. But they understood the consequences of what they were doing. If they didn't do it, millions of people could die and get sick. So they say the greater good outweighs all of that. And so that's another thing in this modern day and age as an entrepreneur. If you're really going to go and try to change things, if your only pursuit is money, don't do it. You have to have something beyond it. It could be saving the environment or cleaning up a mine or removing corruption or whatever it is, because that's the only thing that's going to sustain you in your worst days. When you make a mistake and you're brutally criticized, when you lose good friends, when your family turns on you, when you get sued, when you get imprisoned, all these things. And it happens all the time to people, fairly or unfairly. And so that's the advice I give to young people. It's tough business, toughest business in the world.
Can I jump back just a little bit and ask, sort of attached to that question about the road to redemption? So I appreciate that you basically admitted that it sounds like maybe you got a little bit of Christian education and you are adopting some stoicism. So if so, bravo, that's great. What I'm asking is for you, with these other folks who have very clearly, they've hurled all kinds of like crazy, right, Molotov, verbal Molotov cocktails your way. And they burned those bridges, not you. They burn those bridges. For you, what do you view as the way? And again, this could be framed as advice to young entrepreneurs. How do you extend your hand back out to make sure that it doesn't seem needy, it doesn't seem like you're asking for the handout or whatever? How do you create a path to redemption for others? Because it sounds like you're also advocating that people should be the change they want to see. How do you do that?
Well, that's exactly what we're doing with the ETC community. We didn't exactly leave with the treasury system and everybody was happy and copacetic. ETC Dev and others sponsored a narrative that Cardano with an MLM Ponzi scheme. They said horrible, horrible things about me and my project, my people, and they said we were working on fraudulent technology. People who were core developers of Ethereum Classic said these things, and we're back. We want to affect change because I think it's the right thing to do. So in many cases, you just transcend people, and if they're willing to work with you, you work with them. Like if Adam Back called me up tomorrow and said, "Hey, let's do something," of course we'd say yes. We'd figure it out. It makes it difficult for him to make that phone call when he's publicly said, "I'm a criminal." Mm-hmm. It's as difficult for him as it is for me. But at the end of the day, there's no ego here. We're a mission-driven company. We want to give economic identity to billions of people. I don't care if we have to work with the U.S. government or the European Union. We do. I don't care if we have to work with one particular company over another particular company. As long as we feel that that partnership helps us get to our mission, we'll do that. So you take ego out of it, and it becomes really easy to work with people who criticize you. You learn this in politics. All the time when you're a Republican or a Democrat, the other side of the aisle, you're a horrible human being. You're a monster. You're the worst human being. And then you see them in a bar together, 2 hours later drinking with each other. It's like you just delivered a speech saying this guy like stabs children in the eyes with pencils. How the hell are you guys drinking? He's like, that's the day job. We got to go do that and so forth. I mean, sure, there's some people that legitimately hate each other, like, Ted Cruz and Nancy Pelosi probably aren't going to be drinking together. But look, John McCain and Joe Biden were great friends. As was Lindsey Graham and Joe Biden. They go drinking together all the time. They talk to each other all the time. So you can find common interests and you can find ways to build bridges, even if people say very hurtful or counterproductive things. And you just understand there's a statefulness to comments that people have. And so they have an expiration date. When people say X, Y, and Z, just say, look, they said it then. That was the past. Let's move on. I can't go and say we should live in a culture with more forgiveness and allow people to move on and recover. And then at the same time, say the comments that you said in the past are permanent. I can't do that. I have to say, all right, well, that was the past. Let's all move on. Let's all move forward. Maybe you believed it was a scam 5 years ago, but now we've shown you it's not. You have an escape hatch. Let's now collaborate and partner and so forth. So I think the easiest thing is just removal of ego from the situation. Then you always ask a fundamental question. Does this relationship hinder or help my mission for my company, my vision, the things that I want to accomplish? And if you feel that it helps, then go and do it. If you feel it doesn't help, then let it go. There's no greater example of that in the history of business than Steve Jobs and Bill Gates in 1997. And this is a thing you guys can all go do. You can go YouTube and do this. So Steve, for 20 years, felt that Bill screwed him, stole IP, and basically co-opted the PC industry and took it to a very dark time. Then in 1997, when he becomes the CEO of Apple again, he comes in and his CFO tells him we're 90 days away from bankruptcy and we need a massive cash infusion. So what's the first thing that Steve Jobs does? He picks up the phone and he calls Bill Gates up and he says, Bill, you need to buy $300 million of new Apple stock we're going to issue just for Microsoft so we can get back on the road. And Bill's like, wow, okay. Well, I'm glad that you're back, Steve. That's an interesting ask. Why would I do that? And Steve says, well, look, the U.S. government's coming at you for antitrust. And if Apple goes out of business, you have 100% of the market. It's kind of hard to say that you're not a monopoly, right? And Bill's like, that's a good point, Steve. Yeah, I think I should buy some Apple stock, but it's going to come with some strings attached. And Steve's like, okay, well, what strings? And he says, Internet Explorer's got to be the default browser of Mac OS. You gotta do this and gotta do that. Oh, and by the way, that big Apple convention you have every year? I'd like to announce our new partnership with you. And Steve's like, yeah, that's great. You can come out on stage. And he's like, no. I want to appear behind you on a big 60-foot screen, me lording over you. And you're a very tiny man. Tell everybody how great our partnership is and how much you love working with Microsoft and how we're not the enemy. And Steve's like, okay. And if you actually go to YouTube and you Google and you enter in Steve Jobs 1997 Bill Gates, you can see that presentation where Bill Gates appears behind Steve Jobs, dominating and lording over him. And Steve is just like taking it in the ass from Bill. Because he understood that if he did that, he got the iMac. And if he got the iMac, he got the iPod, and then he would save his company. And now Apple is a $2 trillion company, far more valuable than Microsoft. So you have to have the humility to take your ego out and ask, what is the best thing for the company? In some cases, old enemies become best friends. One of the last people that Steve talked to before he died in 2011 was Bill Gates. He came over to his house and they sat down for a few hours and chatted it out. That would have never happened in 1997. So forgiveness is a key thing. And, the other thing is understand comments are stateful. And at the end of the day, you make decisions when you're in an executive position of what is best for your company and your mission. And you put your ego aside, you swallow your ego. And if a guy as egotistical as Steve Jobs can do that against a guy as egotistical as Bill Gates, then I think there's hope for anybody in the industry. About the only person I won't work with is Craig Wright, because I think he's a sociopath. I was there in Rwanda with him when he went out on stage and said, I have more money than your entire country. And there's just something broken in that guy, and I'm afraid he'll stab me. So and I told Roger Ver that when he got into bed with him when they first did Bitcoin Cash, and they're all like toasting and pretending like life is great. And I said, this guy's a scorpion. He's going to stab you in a bit. And sure enough, SV exists, right? Mm-hmm. So, there's certain people that it's in your best interest because of their personality or the way that they do things that you cannot work with those people. There's other people you have to understand that it's about economics and interests. And if your interests align with their interests, you can coordinate, cooperate with them. And if FDR can find a way to work with Stalin, I can find a way to work with anybody in the industry within reason. And similarly, if Steve can work with Bill, we all as business leaders can learn from that.
Sure. You brought up sociopaths, and sorry, Nicole, I know you got some questions.
No.
But sociopaths in this space, it just seems like nothing attracts them like cryptocurrency. Nothing.
Yeah.
I know for a fact in the proof of work space, obviously I can't name names because I don't want to wake up with my throat cut, but in the proof of work space, oh man, there's some real pieces of work. How do you identify, like, what are some signs that you would say to people who are maybe working on lean, scrappy teams in the space? Maybe they're building, accessory systems or platforms, whatever else. How do you keep from jumping into teams with sociopaths?
Yeah, I've had some bad partnerships throughout my career, and there's some people call me a sociopath. I mean, I guess all things are relative. I think I act with integrity, and I have very low turnover in my company. We have 250 people. We've never been sued. Been around for 8 years. Delivered all the promises that I've made, or we're in the process of delivering them. So I think the key is to divorce it from personality, and you stick to facts and you stick to commitments, and you force people to write things down up front. If you have a relationship with somebody that's going to become a co-founder or an early employee, you have a founder's agreement. And you write it all down before you get into business with that person. These are the ups and downs and what happens if you do X, Y, and Z. If you can't come to terms on a founder's agreement, don't partner with that person. Then at least you have a legal framework upon which your relationship is going to work. And you say, but I'm your friend, trust me. And I said, great. It's going to make it so easy for us to be founders. And, after you get married and have a bunch of kids and you develop the alcohol problem and maybe the success gets to your head, we won't be friends. And so, or such facts and circumstances have changed. And so the whole point is that this document survives that. And now we have a way of handling the relationship productively for both parties. Same for marriages. Before we get married, probably have a prenuptial agreement. 50% of marriages end in divorce. Why should we believe partnerships are any different? So that's the first piece of advice I give is know what a founder's agreement is and write one, and they protect the company as much as they protect you. And that makes the relationship a lot easier moving forward because you have already clarity on how to resolve issues as they come up. Second, hold people accountable to the claims and commitments that they make. If a person says they're X, Y, and Z and they can do X, Y, Z, say, write it all down. And let's come up with metrics, performance metrics. Let's come up with a plan. And here is what you're responsible for, what I'm responsible for, and then we'll revisit it on a monthly or quarterly basis. And you know what? Either they do the job or they don't. And if they don't do the job, doesn't mean they're a sociopath or a bad person, but there's a conversation that needs to be had of why didn't it get done? Were we too ambitious? Was it an unrealistic plan? Et cetera, et cetera. And then based on how they react to that, and how they conduct themselves in failure tells you a lot about a person's character. If they say, look, we just got it wrong and I take accountability for it and I'm sorry for it, but here's how we're going to do better. That tells you a lot about a person versus when they say it's Jane's fault and it's Bob's fault and it's Jim's fault and I did nothing wrong and this guy's responsible and this guy's responsible and so forth. For example, with Cardano, we had a lot of product delays. I am ultimately the one responsible for that. Though we hired some bad teams and we had some poor strategy and we tried to do things that were too complicated and we didn't have the right environment to get that done. But at the end of the day, I'm the guy who made the decision to hire those people. I'm the guy who made the decision to put that framework in place. So ultimately, if there's anyone accountable for any delays that happened, it's me. And I accept full responsibility and accountability for that. And I'm not going to blame one team member over another team member, so forth. As the chief executive, that's my thing. So you have to look for that mentality, and you have to follow up with, I'm accountable with, here's how we're going to be different. So all throughout 2018 and 2019 and 2020, we were changing product management and process management and project management and the way we communicated. We were adding different types of teams. We were hiring new people, rotating people out. We were trying different mechanisms. I even built competing products. I had 2 teams that were running the same implementation. We had the Rust team and the Haskell team competing with each other to see who could build the protocol first so that we could test it with one client over the other client. And through this process, we got to a workflow that allowed us to deliver Shelley. And we got to a workflow that allowed us to build a great product. That was hard earned. And not everybody survived along the road. Some people burnt out. Some people had to be let go. And, I missed some people. There were some incredible people that were part of the company that had we just been better at managing, they'd still be here in the company. And ultimately, whose fault is that? It's mine. So that's the other thing that you have to look for in the people you have a business relationship with at the executive level is accountability and a mentality of we will make mistakes. And it's not about making mistakes. It's about how do we overcome those mistakes to continue with the mission of the company. You have to do that. And you have to accept that you're going to have some scars when you come out the other side. And there's going to be poor decisions that you make. Like with Cardano, we probably, if we get a complete do-over of the whole system, would have built it with a different language and with a slightly different process for the 1.0. And then what we would have done is done the formal methods and then rebuilt it for version 2 with the formal methods, because it would have given us a much longer time to figure out how to do formal methods and how to improve Haskell to a point where it was ubiquitously useful. We spent over a year just working on Windows support for Haskell. We had to improve the programming language. We had to build compilation chains for Haskell to JavaScript and Haskell to WebAssembly. And these are still ongoing projects that we spent literally millions of dollars and years of effort to make the programming language better, to be able to actually allow us to deploy Windows applications and browser-based applications and so forth. It was too ambitious. And so, from a product perspective, I have to ask, could we have accomplished the same thing we wanted with version 1 with Scala or F#, or maybe even JavaScript with a functional blend like Ramda or something like that? And I live with this every day as a CEO asking, could we have done things a little differently? Well, it's water under the bridge. You do a postmortem, you study these things, and then you adjust your strategy accordingly. Now we're on the other side. We have a beautiful product. We have great Haskell code base. It's the best in the world. We have great formal specifications. We have a phenomenal team. I'd argue we have some of the best engineers in the world. We have some of the best scientists in the world. So we paid a high price to get to where we're at. And ultimately, the market will decide whether that price was too much or it was just about right. And competitive pressures will decide where we go. And if I had done things differently, maybe it would have been different, maybe been easier on the front end, but harder on the back end. That's the Ethereum story. They chose a very easy approach to get a product out, and now they're in development hell with F2. And the complexity is kicking their ass, and they keep having all these problems, and they keep having all these delays and so forth. They're literally running into what I paid in 2017 and 2018 and 2019. And ultimately, we'll see which strategy ended up being the better strategy for the market long term. We don't know, So this is the point about who you partner with and the things that you do, is that you have to accept mistakes are going to be made, but then the people that are great and elite, they work with you to get to the next level, and they don't hold the past against you, but they do ask that you pay for it. You pay down the technical debt, you pay down the emotional debt, and that you evolve and grow into the role that you're in. The other thing you have to understand is when you partner with people who are entrepreneurs, they're unformed people in their 20s and their 30s. The emotional intelligence is not there, the skill sets aren't there, and they're going to have epic flaws like a Greek play, okay? And so your game isn't that you're with a perfect person. If you're with a super well-formed, perfect person, if they're a successful entrepreneur, they're already really rich and they're your boss. Okay, they're running a Fortune 500 company. Okay, Larry Page is very well-formed at this point. But Larry Page was not very well-formed when he was with Sergey in a garage in Stanford, in his 20s. He was a graduate student at Stanford. And so he was an unformed person. So you have to have patience with people as well. And that's why it's so important to have their ability to say they're sorry, take accountability, and acknowledge that they need to improve and grow. I had a very thin skin when I joined the space. And every day I work a little bit on making the skin a little thicker. And every day I work a little bit to care a little less about what people say and what people do, and trying to build bridges where previously I would throw fire on the bridge. On the other hand, I have a very combative style that is actually beneficial as a CEO in some cases. Being able to kick people in the teeth is sometimes one of the most effective things to get shit done. So if you're too copacetic and everybody's kumbaya and get along, that's going to hurt you as much as it helps you. And if you're too combative, no one wants to work with you. You can't get anything done. And, this is the same thing Steve Jobs had to deal with from the 80s to the 90s to the 2000s. He was too aggressive in the 80s. And then in the 90s, he met John Lasseter and Ed Catmull, and they built Pixar. And Ed and Lasseter and Ed, they taught him so much about how to be chill. So when he came back to Apple, he was still Steve, and he could still kick people in the teeth, but he was a lot nicer. And as a consequence, he could build what he needed to build to get Apple to where it became. Whereas if he was the same person in the 80s when he came back, Apple would have went out of business within 2 years. It would have failed as a company because he just couldn't do those things. So there's a lot of lessons. You have to be obsessed with growth. That's the last thing that you look for in a co-founder or another person is, does this person have a desire to be better? Are they always trying new things? Are they meditating? Are they reading books? Are they getting therapy if they need to get therapy? Are they admitting to their mistakes? Are they trying to find ways to be better? What's their personal life look like? They have stable personal life, or they have six wives and like a whole bunch of illegitimate children that don't talk to them anymore. I was like, everybody has a track record. If you're dealing with an older person, a person in their 40s, their 50s, the single most valuable thing you can do to vet somebody is ask them what is their longest business relationship, and you want to talk to that person. Any real businessman who's a real person, if they're in their 40s or 50s, they're going to roll out some guy that they've known since they were 15 years old, some gal that they've known since they were in college or high school that they've been working with long term. If they don't have anybody in their network that they've been working with more than 2 years, 3 years, that's a humongous red flag for that person. Because it's saying that nobody wants to work with this person long term. Nobody wants to come through long term. All my companies, I drag people along. When I went from Ethereum, some of the people from Ethereum came to a Cardano. And now I'm here. I have people who've been with me for years. And when I'm in my 40s and 50s, I'm probably going to have people been with me for a decade or longer. Right? And I can point to those people, say I drag them along with me. And some were friends for a long time. In every case where you see a scandal, where there's been some guy that hasn't worked out, there's one with Tezos, for example, and you actually go into their background, they've had no one in their background for more than a year or two. And anybody who's been there longer, they fired, or there was a problem or an interpersonal issue or something like that. That's the last thing you look for, is the track record. If a person's young, it's kind of difficult because they have no history, you don't know. So you look for potential. But if a person's older, they have a history, they have a background, they have a track record, and so forth. If you were to hire Bill Gates today to go and partner with you and do something, Bill has a crew that he's been working with since he was 19 years old. And he's going to bring his crew with him, and these guys are just going to be there. These gals are going to be there, and they're just going to get it done. If you brought in a con man or a sociopath or something, every single person will be 25 years old and doe-eyed and mesmerized, but they've never worked with that person for a long time. That's how you know.
Okay. Awesome. So I do have some questions about Cardano, and I want to kind of turn things there, if that's okay. I know that we're going on a really long time. So here's a long one. All right. Many people tout the merits of Cardano because of how KYC and regulatory you and the team at IOHK have been. With the current financial system crumbling around us and more people recognizing that the existing framework of the financial system and also of government regulatory agencies is itself a scam, what can you say that might ease the minds of those who are concerned that anything designed to comply within that flawed system would only further exacerbate enslavement or, yeah.
Okay, well, you broke up a little bit there. I'm sorry. So I missed the first part of the question.
Okay, so I said a lot of people tout the merits of Cardano because of how KYC and regulatory friendly. You and the team at OHK.
Okay, let's talk about that. So KYC AML is not necessarily a bad thing. The problem is how it's done, and the problem is where it's done, and also the question of consent. So our belief is that protocols are built in layers, and first and foremost, at the base layer of the protocol, you do not do things like transaction reversals, freezing of funds, KYC and AML. You do not put that in layer 0. You don't put that into the fundamental DNA of the product. Mm-hmm. What you do instead is you build services that live on top of that product that are used by businesses and their customers to properly use that product to comply with whatever jurisdiction they happen to be in. So, for example, we built something called PRISM. It's an identity management framework. And we have this great thing called a DID. And so a DID is an open standard. It's called Decentralized Identifier. And it basically gives you an ID inside the system that people can go and authenticate and prove things about and so forth. So here's an example of how you can layer that and preserve your principles. So what you do is you say, okay, if you're exchange X customer, in addition to signing up for this exchange, you're going to register a DID with the exchange. Then anytime you want to withdraw funds from the exchange, you have to sign the address that you're withdrawing from with your DID. Very simple thing. And you can build software that makes it super easy for the consumer to do that. Well, what's the point of it? You now have an authenticated withdrawal, which verifies that that address belongs to the customer that you've already done KYC and AML on. Super powerful for privacy coins, for example, because they have this thing called the travel rule from FATF. And you say, so you have to prove custody, you have to prove these people exist. So something as simple as just signing an address satisfies that. And is that built into the protocol? No, it's built on top of the protocol. And it's a particular commercial relationship between the customer and the business. And then you say, well, what about privacy? What about this? You say, you can add that in. Those DIDs can be encrypted, and also they don't have to be transparent. So you can say this hash corresponds to Bob, but only the business and Bob know that, but no one on the outside of the system know that. And what the system does is it makes it easier to comply because the system timestamps things. It has immutability, so people can't change records. And also it have a non-repudiation. So when those signatures are committed, there's no way to back out and say, oh, that's not Bob. So I, as the regulated entity, like an exchange or a bank, now can go to the regulator and have absolute proof that I did business the way they told me to do business. So I avoid the fine, it makes my compliance easier, and also it automates a lot of things and saves me money. Then my customer, they're complying with the regulatory regime. You don't like the regulatory regime? Well, go vote the people who put that regime in out and replace them with new people. But as a business, I have no choice but to comply with what's asked. But what I will not do is build a protocol with a particular geography's viewpoint into it. Like I'm not going to wake up like Ripple does and say, how do we make the US government happy? Mm-hmm. Similarly, I'm not going to wake up and say, how do we make China happy? Because they have a very draconian regime with social credit and so forth. Mm-hmm. I build a protocol that's neutral to all these things. And then what we do is we build tools that you can localize and then use them within the jurisdictions you want to do business in. And then you have to accept that when you do business in China, the government's going to know a lot more about you and be much more draconian versus when you do business in Seychelles or in Liechtenstein or Mauritius or something like that. Mm-hmm. And the key is to do this in a way where you know the terms and conditions up front. The problem with modern society is that everything is a tip of the iceberg, okay? So we see this little tip and we think that that's the arrangement, but then there's all this stuff that happens underneath the surface that you don't get to see as a consumer, and you don't know what people are doing with your data. You don't know what permissions they have, who else is going to be able to see that, or what the regulator is doing. What I want to do is build systems that show you the whole iceberg. So you know when you go and do business in China, the full extent of what that means to your privacy and to your money and to what you're consenting to. And you agree to that upfront before you have that commercial relationship. This is the magic of smart contracts. This is the magic of layer 2 solutions, infrastructure that you build onto the chain, because you as the consumer have to click yes. You have to consent to that before you enter into that. And then everything is as it was agreed. You don't get things that are changed in the backdrop or retroactive changes or things like that. Or you find out that Mark Zuckerberg sold all your data to the US government or something like that. That doesn't happen when you have these types of systems. Now, in practice, this requires a lot of new technology and new cryptography, and it requires a lot of really sophisticated thinking. Like recently, Algorand published a paper with some co-authors, great paper, beautiful paper. It's called "Can a Blockchain Keep a Secret?" It's a very detailed technical paper, and the answer is yes, but with an asterisk, it's really hard, and there's a lot of like stuff you have to do to get there. The good news is that as we advance the crypto and as we advance the blockchain tech, then we can start automating a lot of these things. Like we look to Africa, for example. Ethiopia currently doesn't have a stock market, but they will within 24 to 36 months. And when they do, we can go to the Ethiopian government and say, why the hell are you doing compliance like the US government does, with the exchange being a custodian of people's data and stars and all this stuff? Why don't you just tell us what you want, and we can write it all as smart contracts, and we can embed it right into the transactions as they happen. And when you do business in Ethiopia, add it to your transaction. And then you have everything automated, and there's no compliance officer at the exchange. They just have to show the audit trail and show that the blockchain followed that standard. And that, what does it mean? It means you save 1/3 of all your operating costs as a regulated entity in Ethiopia on average. And there's no fines because everybody's following the rules. And then if I, as a foreign actor, want to comply with Ethiopian law, I just like inherit a smart contract library instead of hiring an Ethiopian lawyer and building a compliance desk and doing all this stuff and so forth. And they say, wow, that would make us so much more competitive against the European US markets. So I think that's the other side is, one, did you build capabilities, and two, you lobby those capabilities to say this is a much better way of doing things for the regulator and the regulated, and you have better outcomes overall. And then suddenly we live in a world where all the terms and conditions are up front. There's no hidden print, and the consumer knows the extent of the iceberg. And if they're sickened and really dismayed over the fact that the iceberg is very draconian, then political change happens. They say, hang on a second here, I'm not comfortable with that. I want that to go away. And then they'll vote politicians in who will change the law to accommodate that.
Okay, actually, I think that was like perfect answer. So thank you. All right. So speaking about Ethiopia, I watched a semi-recent interview of you with Ivan and Tech on Tech talking about the importance of supply chain for medicine in rural communities like Ethiopia, where 1/3 of their medicine is fake. So what are your thoughts on the impact that integrating blockchain into supply chain could have on big pharma in the United States?
Sorry, I was just getting a note from my secretary.
No, sorry about, I know we've gone a really long time.
Okay. Yeah, no problem at all. So you're asking about supply chain Ethiopia. You know, supply chain is like the killer app for blockchain in general, because at the end of the day, you talk about basically movement of something. It could be food, medicine, something, through a series of different actors who have to work together but don't fully trust each other. In some cases have perverse incentives to defraud each other. So this is the point of blockchain. People say, well, it's just a database. Like, oh, fuck yourself. You don't understand what's going on. It's about commercial friction. And commercial friction comes in when you have to work with people that you don't fully know and trust, but you have to work together to ultimately accommodate the needs of a market. So let's look at fertilizer, for example. I met with the CEO of the Agricultural Transformation Agency in Ethiopia when I was in Addis Ababa last year, and Khalid and I had dinner. And I sat down and I said, Khalid, what are some of the problems you face running the ATA? It's an organization in charge of 15 million smallholder farmers. So their job is to take the poorest farmers in Ethiopia and find a way to get them sustainable and productive and ultimately lift them up out of poverty. Bill Gates helped create the agency with the Ethiopian government about 10 years ago. And he said, Charles, one of my biggest problems is I get fertilizer bags in Djibouti and they weigh 50 pounds. And by the time they go to Addis Ababa, they've gone on a diet and they weigh 35 pounds. That's a pretty simple problem, right? People are stealing fertilizer in the supply chain. And I asked, well, how many people touch that supply chain? So any good given transit, probably 100 to 200 entities are involved in the movement of fertilizer from Djibouti to Ethiopia. And we don't have a lot of regularity in those entities. We're changing warehouses all the time, changing logistics companies all the time. All kinds of weird shit comes into that. This is a perfect example of where blockchain makes sense. Why? Because you have an object, in this case, a fertilizer bag. You'd like for that object to be unadulterated, and verification that as it goes through the chain, it hasn't been tampered with step by step. And then you have a lot of agents who are operating on that object, And you would like that when those agents behave badly, that there's some degree of Byzantine resistance, fraud resistance, as it transits that chain. Now, it doesn't matter if that's fertilizer from Djibouti to Addis Ababa, or if you go to Mongolia and talk about antibiotics being shipped from Beijing to Ulaanbaatar, and 33% of them are tampered with or adulterated or expired, or in some cases are just sugar pills and not even really antibiotics. So no matter what the good is, you want to be able to sort out who are the actors touching it, what are the types of transactions that are occurring, where can people commit fraud, and how do we layer anti-fraud protection in, and how do we build a record that can't be retroactively changed or tampered with. That's another big problem with all supply chains. People go and edit the ledger. Somebody at a warehouse say, no. It's you ever watch Lord of War when they were talking about all the guns going to Africa? It's like, no. We didn't have three barracks full of guns. We only had 2. It's like, let's just go erase the logbooks, right? You can't do that with a blockchain. So it's a killer application in respect. And what's really nice about it is that the blockchain forces the conversation of how do you improve the business processes in such a way that people can interface with it in a fraud-free way. But the minute you've done that, you've given digital identity to everybody who's touching that system, and you've given those people a payment system, you've given those people a voting system, you've given those people a property registration system, you've given those people a financial marketplace. Okay, so there's suddenly all these amazing applications that can be built on top of that infrastructure. Like, for example, you create Uber for fertilizer bags, and then people can bid out in a competitive marketplace of the lowest cost person to deliver it. And then you have a reputation system on top of that. And if people steal from the supply chain, their reputation gets destroyed. They can no longer make money transporting these things. So they get purged from the system, just like eBay has with power sellers. You see, so this is the amazing consequence of building good infrastructure. The problem is it takes time. Every one of these deals is 3 to 7 years minimum. And you have to build a PPP, a public-private partnership. And you have to build dozens of local partnerships on the ground. And in many cases, the infrastructure is not good enough to natively put this in. Like, we bid on a fertilizer voucher program in Africa, and it turned out only 5% of the farmers who received those vouchers have smartphones. So we have digital products, so 95% don't have the ability to use a digital product. It's like, oh God, how do you make that work? Well, you get creative. You say, well, wait a minute. The 5% who do, we've just created 5% small business owners, because they can do a hub and spoke model, and they can be the onboard offboarding ramp for their local community, and they get tolls for that. You see, so this is kind of creativity that comes in that process. Who came up with that was somebody we had in Ethiopia, who's like, well, this is the way we do it. Where it's like, yeah, we were thinking of a technological solution. We were like, how do we build trusted hardware and get private keys offline and do this and that? He said, why don't you just have these guys run small businesses? And we're like, yeah, that's a really good idea. It's kind of like the old adage, NASA spends millions of dollars to figure out how to use a pen in space, and Russia just used pencils. It's like sometimes you could over-engineer things, and if you have some practicality behind the way you think, you just get a little simpler. And that's exactly what we do. And you have to have a lot of patience. And the problem with our industry is it's the most impatient of all industries. And so they say, if you don't solve the problem tomorrow, it's a scam. Or if you don't solve it tomorrow, you're going to lose your lead. It's like, guys, these guys aren't going anywhere. There are 3 billion people with no economic identity. And, we have the time to spend 3 years or 4 years building something with them, because once we do, we bring 50 million people or 100 million people into our system. Ethiopia has 106 million people. 70% are under the age of 30. And 90% of that 70% do not like the sovereign currency, want to use different currencies. They want to use competitive money. They know of M-Pesa, and they've been online. They've used Facebook. They've used other things. So you have a super well-educated, online-aware demographic that is crypto-friendly, and that's 70 million people in that country. So that's the example of a demographic advantage. And those are the people that will adopt crypto well before my grandmother does, well before anybody does.
My grandmother owns crypto.
I actually don't have a grandmother. I lost both of them in the last 24 months. So well before my mom does, I should say. How about that? So anyway, that's the keys. You got to look at where the demographic of the future is. It's like if you were born in the 19th century, they say, where do you go? Go to London. You're born in the 20th century, where to go? Go to New York. So in the 21st century, where do you do business? It's not China. It's Africa. It's Eastern Europe. It's Southeast Asia. Why? Because these economies are growing 10 to 20% per year, and they're the youngest economies. And therefore, they have first access to all the knowledge, ideas, and no preconceived notions or commitment to the past or vendor preferences. There's no monopoly there.
That seems like a bit of a double-edged sword, though, too. You're talking about building infrastructure and bringing 70 million new users on board online. They're okay with M-Pesa, like you're mentioning. They're looking for solutions that are going to help solve some of these problems. What is their exposure and their attitude and their taste for privacy at this point? Are they worried about the data being weaponized against them?
Because it's not academic for people in Africa. Many countries in Africa still have totalitarian governments. Many countries in Africa still have purges that happen. And so you say privacy, they say, if the government knows about this, they're going to go and kill me. I'll give you a great example. We know some doctors that are in Nuba, and that's an area in Sudan, and they have to use crime networks to buy medical supplies, because if they buy them through legitimate channels, then the government will actually show up and take them from them. They'll steal the medical supplies and raid the caravans as they come through. So the same people who sell drugs sell them a surgical mask and other equipment just to simply provide humanitarian. And this is the Catholic Church that pays for these things. Okay, so it's not exactly like a out there radical left-wing organization. You know, this is like a very old, very conservative organization that's dealing with crime networks to basically import and export things because they need that privacy. Okay, they get underground newspapers. They get when somebody gets killed. Some of these governments shut the whole internet off. They actually shut the whole country down. Secret police show up, black bag people. So privacy is a paramount concern, and it's not an academic concern. Many of these places, very radically conservative religious movements, whether it be Christian or Muslim, many areas in Africa are incredibly anti-gay. And if they find out that you're gay, they actually kill you. They stone you to death. It happens all the time in sub-Saharan Africa in certain places because of these regressive beliefs. So it's not a luxury to have privacy for your lifestyle. It's a life or death thing, where you have to choose between your lifestyle and love or the fact that you could be murdered. So they care a lot about these systems and what are the implications of these systems. Another thing is that in some cases, the governments care a lot about these things because they're beholden to foreign interests. The greatest example is China. It's put $1 trillion into the continent over the last 20 years in very predatory debt capitalism. And they've come in and they've basically on the front end said, we'll do all these amazing things for you. And then the governments can't pay them back after they do all these amazing things. So then the Chinese military shows up, the Chinese government shows up, they just start taking everything over. And then if the local government opposes it, they end up disappearing or getting pushed out of office or things like Zambia is one of the worst countries in this respect. So the local government is like, how do we actually protect ourselves from the Chinese intelligence service, the People's Republic of China? So in some cases you find allies in the most unexpected of places, where like you have a meeting with a head of state and you're expecting to talk about like humanitarian aid or direct foreign investment. They're like, hey, can we get some of that like magic moon math privacy technology for something? Because we're really concerned that we're being spied on by foreign powers. And, we don't really have the ability to prevent that. And we're deeply concerned that if, China knew what we were talking about, they would use it against us in trade negotiations or these types of things and so forth. So it's the citizens and the countries in that respect that are deeply concerned about it.
So I'm curious then, as a follow-up, so to what extent are the solutions that some of these emerging markets, what they're looking for and what they need, to what extent is it really dependent on blockchain? And to what extent is it really dependent on there being systemic change that comes from a cultural grassroots movement paired with cryptography and encryption?
So you need a population that's willing and able to embrace the ideas. You couldn't do cryptocurrencies 30 years ago. The concepts were there. Like Hayek was talking about private money, and the basic science and math was at a point where you could conceive of something like Bitcoin. But we needed really cell phones and the internet revolution, and we really needed like generations of percolation that it's okay for your money to live in the sky, and that's okay. And my grandfather will never accept these things. He's 90 years old. He's a very traditional guy in this respect. He likes hard money. He likes things that he can hold in his hand. And you say, oh, there's money in the sky. And he's like, it's crazy. But he has one of the patents on the cable box. He's not a Luddite. He's a very bright guy, my grandfather on my mom's side. It's just, that's his generation. That's where it came from. He was a product of the Great Depression. And if I can't see it, it's not real. It doesn't exist. That kind of show me type of mentality. So there's a generationality and there's a level of societal progress that's required to get to a certain point. And then you need symbol you can point to that says it's okay. Like, okay, well, this company did it. Oh, okay. Or this event happened and nobody died and it's all right. Like e-voting, for example. It's one of those things, just like gay marriage, when it happens, it'll happen so quickly and everybody will adopt it. So in the United States, for a long time, when I first went to college, big man, should gays be allowed to marry or not? And then finally the Supreme Court put its foot down and said, fuck it, let's do it. And that's like, it's not a problem. No one talks about it. No one thinks about it anymore. It's just like, and it's like, yeah, obviously. So the same thing will happen with e-voting. Germany or France or some country will wake up and say, you can vote online. And within 5 years, most of the major democracies in the world will do that. It'll just happen. It'll become a standard thing. And then we'll look back and say, like, we used to stand in line? This is fucking crazy. Another example is video conferencing. I remember when I was a kid, I watched Alien and they had the video conferencing and we're like, wow, that's the future. This is so cool. And it was like magical and mystical. And I can't remember the first Skype call I made. I can't remember the first time I did. I really can't. It just, it feels like I've been doing it my whole life. And it's a standard thing. It's like, no one even thinks about it, but there was a time when that was magic. So cryptocurrency is the same way in that respect. And it's not just one thing, it's a collection of things. And there's some generationality in it. And then there's the young people just jump on board and then they kind of drag the next generation with them. And then the parents will get on board and the grandparents will ignore it. And they kind of die out. Facebook was another great example of that. There were no old people on Facebook in day one. They were all college students. But college students graduate, they go move, and then they use the platform to stay in touch with their parents. And so they onboarded all their parents. And now it's the case where the parents stayed and the children didn't. They moved to different social networks and Facebook is now kind of older. And Mark Zuckerberg wakes up every day and he says, oh God, how do I get the next generation? Do I buy TikTok? What do I do? I mean, he does all these crazy things. So that's the same situation here with cryptocurrencies, that, you have a cohort that's capable of dragging people in. People come in for whatever reason they come in. They drag friends and family in, and then that brings other things. You eventually build a stable population inside the system. And if it's a good idea, it's permanent, like video conferencing or e-voting or these things, and it just sticks around forever.
Awesome. Okay, anyway. So at what point will Cardano be interoperable with Ethereum? And that's actually a community question, Carla. Yeah.
I got to get going. I have an appointment at 4:30, but I will give you a brief answer to that question. Interoperability is a difficult thing because you can do pure interoperability, for example, where you replicate the Ethereum virtual machine, like what Tron has done or other people have done. And you say, oh, okay, now your Solidity code can run on our system one-to-one and your tooling is interoperable. And actually, that's been a market loser. Every person who's tried to do that, it has not substantially moved the needle on developer adoption. It seems like it would be a good idea. Like, oh, well, your code can run on our system one-to-one and you don't have to retool everything. And even Microsoft tried to do that. They tried to build a framework called Xamarin to get people onto Windows Phone when they were competing with Windows Phone against Android and iOS. And they said, oh, we have this universal framework and you can compile your code to run on Android and Mac and Windows and all these other things. So just use our framework. And, oh, by the way, it'll work on Windows Phone too. And it's just click a button and you can support us. You know how much adoption Xamarin got? Almost none. Even though it was great technology and they spent billions of dollars trying to roll it out. So I think the key is you don't worry so much about interoperability with the standard, but rather what you do is you try to ask yourself, what are these developers suffering from? Where are their pain points? And how do I solve those particular pain points for those developers? And it can be a cost, it can be a quality, it can be a security conversation, it could be a usability and accessibility, it could be a performance conversation. But there's something in that conversation that when you get to that root cause, it makes it a lot easier for them to migrate. Everybody who's on Ethereum, every one of those successful applications has a team thinking about how do they get off Ethereum. Because it's too expensive, it's too slow, and there are a lot of legacy problems there. And Vitalik would be the first to admit it, which is why he's building Ethereum 2 to replace Ethereum. Even he wants to get off Ethereum. So that's
intellectual honesty, though. I mean, like you mentioned before, some praise for Vitalik, and I appreciate you saying that again. That it's the catch-22, right? It just shows he's sane.
Yeah, he's a sane person, and he's even trying to get off Ethereum. And so it's not a question of how do we be like Ethereum, it's how do we be better than Ethereum and provide something better for a particular demographic and be relentlessly focused at satisfying their needs, relentlessly focused. So you wake up every day, you eat your Wheaties and say, I want to own this. The power of Cardano is we're high assurance. And so we wake up every day and we say, hey, it's bad what happens with the AM and the DAO hack and all these other things. And maybe people losing all their money with poorly written code is a bad deal. So let's build a system where that's a lot harder to do. And it gives you a lot more safety and security in your smart contract experience. If you're dealing with privacy and money, probably a good idea. What does it mean? You lose a little bit of developer accessibility, but then you have to ask yourself, are those the developers you want, the ones that are going to write things that blow up in people's face? Because I own that brand as much as they own that brand when it blows up. Vitalik was not responsible for the DAO hack, but it's his Monica Lewinsky. It's the thing that will forever be part of his reputation legacy. You know, because and I bring that because when you think of Bill Clinton,
Charles, you just Epstein Vitalik, man, come on.
I bring it up because every single person about Bill Clinton, when you talk about Bill Clinton and his legacy, they go to that event. And similar, when you bring up Ethereum, every single person who talks about Ethereum, they go to that event. It was one event. It happened. They recovered from it. You can be for it, against it. They recovered. They moved on, similar to Bill. But that event is what defines the thing. And so similarly, the DAO hack defines Ethereum in a very good respect. And so what I'm saying is that it's probably in your best interest as a platform designer to make those types of events really hard to happen. Because if they do happen too early in, then Cardano will be unfairly labeled as, oh, well, blah hack happened and there you go. So I don't want to get Lewinsky'd in that respect. So anyway, that's what you do. That's how you compete, is predict where they need to go, understand their pain points, whatever those pain points happen to be. Pick a subset that you think you really want to focus on. Functional programming is great because in the financial industry, Barclays uses it, Chase uses it, dozens of big banks use it. There's a lot of hedge funds that use functional programming for their financial models. So that developer group is intimately familiar with the types of things we do. And they use that because they don't want to make mistakes because they're dealing with billions of dollars, in some cases trillions of dollars of other people's money. So they say, let's do it right the first time. So own that demographic and then do what the iPhone did. Have 5 or 10 great experiences at launch that really showcase why this platform deserves to exist. And remember, when the iPhone first came out, it had 0 developers against Microsoft that had 3 billion users and hundreds of millions of developers and customers and other things using that product professionally. They had 0 developers. And now the iPhone is the dominant platform for cell phone development, and cell phones are the dominant platform for computation in just less than 12 years. Think about that. And so you can change things super quickly. But what Steve did is he was relentlessly focused on what can we do that other people can't do, that Microsoft can't do with their platforms. Let's go do that, and let's do it really well. Be super disciplined about it. Get funding behind the projects that want to do that. In his case, he had the I Fund. I have the C Fund. Same concept. And then build all that out. And once you have that out, those developers will stick with you, and they'll go become billion-dollar companies, and they'll bring a lot of people into your platform. And that's exactly what happened with him. And so what's going to happen with Cardano, in my view. I think we have a good shot at getting ourselves there. Anyway, love to stay in chat. Unfortunately, I got to get to the bank. Thank you guys so much. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you so much, Charles. And hey, subscribe, like, comment. We'll see you next time.
Oh my gosh, poor guy. He's like, I gotta go.
I know. That was really, really long. Okay, jump off. Do you think